So continued due to the birth, adoption, or placement for foster care that does not, child care that does not require medical necessity, leave is available for bonding. So the way that it's described to me under PFL, which is I think similar to FMLA, is if you need to take time off, let's say for the bonding, but also potentially for paperwork and things like that, that could be potentially FMLA eligible as well, job protection. So can take FMLA for themselves or to care for their parent, etc. Medical conditions meet the above criteria. Exclude the following conditions unless patient care or complications develop. So again, cosmetic treatments, common colds, flu, earaches, upset stomach, minor ulcers, headaches other than migraines. We talked about that. Routine dental or orthodontia problems and periodontal disease. Again, so dentist stuff can be covered as well. And there's, I think, a couple slides down, we'll get into that definition of who can sign off FMLA paperwork. So concurrent leave, I think we've already talked about that. And again, we talked about the variation here. The one thing I've seen, again, with some of these policies is making sure if you're having people, forcing people to run it concurrently with PTO, sick time, whatever it might be, we're being consistent. We're sending people letters, making sure everyone is treated equitable in this process. So, if you have a frequent abuser or someone that you think is not being honest about their leave, and all of a sudden we're going to run a concurrent for you and not for someone else, that could get you into a lawsuit or potential discrimination issue with that person. So again, policy needs to be clearly outlined on what you're going to do, how you're going to run it concurrently, or if you want to give the people the option, it's up to you. Again, I have clients that now we have PFL and other things in this state where they're not going to run it concurrently. They're going to let people use, right now we have 8 weeks of paid family leave, and then if they need additional time off, they're going to give them 12 weeks of FMLA leave. So 20 weeks out of work, it's a lot, but that is the option they're giving people. That's what the policy states. So we want to make sure informing people on concurrent leave processes, send them a letter, making sure it's outlined, they signed off on the policies. Everyone should know those things if it's a handbook, whatever it is. So just remember that as you get into what you're doing. All right. So employers, under certain circumstances, may request that an employee recertify the claim, FMLA claim within the same year. Employers, in general, employer may request a certification no more often than every 30 days. Again, and the client I was working with, they have their FMLA outsourced. They have somebody else manage that process for them, but they still wanted to talk through it as a group. They do hold people accountable that way and have recertifications done every 30 days. Most of the time, the clients that I've worked with or places I've worked besides that, it's once a year, just to make sure we're holding people accountable to see if it's still an open claim. But then again, other places when I've done audits and looked at records, it hasn't been looked at for 5-10 years. Not a good idea. So that's one area that you might want to take a look at. You have a big workforce. You want to make sure you're holding people accountable and auditing those records. I know it takes more time, but if you're trying to get your arms wrapped around FMLA, it's good to have that purge of the system and recertify. Just again, going back to this, enforce consistently. So if you're making one person recertify, we need to make everyone recertify. If you're gonna do it, put them on notice and say, hey, we're looking at this, and any claims that have not been recertified in the last 6 or 12 months, we're going to ask the person to come in and recertify. If it's not valid, fine, it's over with. But at the same time, if you are seeing some abuse with it or potential abuse, you're going to want to recertify some of that stuff. So employer must wait longer than 30 days. Initial certification indicates more than 30 days. You must wait the minimum until the duration expires before requesting certification. So again, the doctors, I've seen ongoing in some of these forms. If you're confused about it, if you think that it's not clear written on the certification form by the physician, because not always is, it's fine to send it back and request more information. You can either send it back yourself or have the employee do it. Definitely put a letter with it where there might be confused on what exactly they're asking for or the employee's requesting, things like that. And in most cases, All cases, employer may request recertification every 6 months. So it's up to you. Again, I mean, but just be consistent with that. Most of the time, what we've done is a year. It's easier to manage that every year to kind of look at those things. But if those are the things you just want to look at, track it. Another area that it can be a hard process to follow. So common abuses. So these are things I've seen, in my career. And I'll give you some examples as we get into this. Missing Mondays and Fridays consistently or taking leave to extend a holiday. One place where I came from, which was, a paper mill, one of the things I did see a lot was, during the week, we worked 12-hour shifts in the paper mill. And, if somebody called in sick, they could get forced on an 18-hour day, which is a long day, especially if you got to work 2 or 3 days after that. So what would happen is people might call in and say, hey, I'm using an FMLA day. Whether it was legitimate or not, again, we didn't do the best at managing it back then, but that's what would happen. I'm going to use an FMLA day today. Let's say it's a Friday or a Saturday. They're going to use FMLA. So that leaves us shorthanded, potentially shutting down equipment, et cetera. All the things happen, trying to run it short, trying to backfill it with someone that's, on their break or vacation. All right. So we do that. And then on Sunday, it was a double time day or a holiday, which was a triple time day. They're not missing that day for FMLA, so they can make up a lot of that money with one day. So again, those are things that I saw as common issues and some like pattern behavior, I guess would be the better way to see that. So watch for those things, Mondays and Fridays, maybe extended holidays, whatever it might be. Those are issues I have seen in my career. Or if, they know there's going to be overtime, they don't want to work overtime, that's another issue. Taking leave, regular, intermittent at any time without actually having the underlying serious health condition as a reason. Sometimes it's good to get private investigators on those things. Again, that's an added cost. But if you think someone is abusing the system consistently, you might want to have someone take a look at that. So alternate medical certification that leave would be allowed or extended beyond the healthcare providers actually noted. So again, falsifying medical records. So they're actually going in and changing the form, changing the dates. Obviously, that's fraud. At the least, they could be terminated. But if a doctor sees it, that's a big deal. So probably good to keep an eye again if you've got concerns on that one to see if the handwriting looks different, if it looks like it was whited out at one point. Always good to get the original copies back to verify those things. Here's a good one. Working another job with the same duties they are out on leave for. Again, may not be conclusive evidence they're committing abuse, but again, it's just another example of what could happen. I've heard stories of people doing that when they're out on workers' comp. Obviously there's some organizations I'm working with now that we have private investigators following up on some issues for us. But that is an area that I have seen, and heard stories of people doing that. I've never seen it done with FMLA more on the workers' comp side than anything else. So what's needed? Documentation, payroll and identifying employee data, dates FMLA leave is taken by employee, leave may be designated in records as FMLA leave, hours of the leave. FMLA leave is taken in increments of less than one full day. So again, one thing that I found in my career with some of these organizations that have like subcontracted or outsourced their FMLA leave tracking is, how do you know that, how does that process of communication work back to a supervisor or work back to the HR department? Because you could be waiting days or weeks to say, hey, was this approved or not? And all of a sudden it's 2 or 3 weeks down the road and you're trying to fight with someone about leave that was taken 2 or 3 weeks ago. Have they exhausted all their leave as well? Those are things that are incredible to me to think about, and that's where that complexity of having a third party manage that for you. And it seems like the third parties are very conservative on denying or approving or, denying certain leave or things like that. So again, that's just one thing I have seen with the subcontracting of it. And then again, making sure we're tracking it through payroll, making sure they're calling into the third party to confirm that leave. So employees notice of leave provided the employee under FMLA, writing, etc. Any documents including written electronic records describing employee benefits or employee policy practices regarding taking